On January 19, 2020, I entered the same Pret a Manger where the previous incident had occurred. I was standing in the queue when a hand gripped my arm and a voice said,
"I hear you've been spreading tales, you little shit. You're fucking dead."
I turned to see the brains of the new partnership holding my arm, my former protector standing beside him, grinding his fist into the palm of his other hand and smiling. During the intervening Christmas season, both men had continued to volunteer for a number of street-level charities and had continued their harassment. They had also acquired the assistance of other homeless people they had befriended while volunteering. They were informing everyone that not only was I a violent offender, but a thief and a convicted sex offender, using the newspaper coverage surrounding the other Peter Mitchell as proof. Few would actually read the stories themselves, just the headlines. Some people believed them, some didn't. A major theft had also occurred at the soup kitchen associated with the American International Church on Tottenham Court Road where my former friend was volunteering. He informed them I was the person behind the crime and should be reported to the police, as well as denied access to their services. They had enough doubts about my physical strength to question my ability to have conducted the burglary, and continued to allow me access to their meals and services. Other charities were not so benevolent, and I found myself turned away from their food drops and Christmas events. These were worrying developments, but no specific threats were made against me. Until I found myself literally in his grip in the queue at Pret a Manger. He shoved me away, stood back and pointed, shouting for the entire coffee shop to hear.
"This man is a pedophile. He is not allowed back to Canada because he raped children. And he is now raping children here."
He pulled out his smartphone and announced the proof could be found with an online search, and started reading newspaper headlines referring to the other Peter Mitchell, clearly identifying him as a pedophile. He raised his phone to show one of those headlines prominently displayed, and slowly turned to give all eyes in the immediate vicinity the chance to read it. He went on to shout I was also a violent drug addict who beats up members of the homeless community, and a thief, stealing from the good charities that try to help. He identified himself as a drug and alcohol counselor, brandishing one of the business cards he had printed, and was there with his associate to take me to the police station at Charing Cross to stop me from raping people's children. He didn't want to alarm anyone, but stated they may need assistance if I grew violent. Every pair of eyes in the store looked at me as I began shaking uncontrollably. He seized on that to loudly proclaim I was on drugs right now and could turn violent at any time. A few customers hurriedly left the store. The young woman on the till, frightened, asked me to please leave. I made a few slow steps toward the exit when my former friend lunged. I ran out of the shop screaming at the top of my lungs. He came after me. I raced down the street to the Charing Cross police station a block away, screaming for help as he pursued me. I ran screaming into the station. The woman at the desk immediately told me to leave. I caught my breath, steadied myself as best I could, and gaspingly informed her 2 men were after me, were trying to kill me, and were standing outside the station waiting for me. She told me I had to use the online form to report a crime. I shouted, "Are you fucking kidding me?" She said I was being verbally abusive to her, and if I didn't leave immediately, she would have me escorted out. She picked up the phone next to her and looked at me, her fingers poised over the dial pad. I left the station and saw both men at the end of the street. I phoned the charity in a state of crying hysteria, and they immediately offered to drive down to assist. For the next hour I stood in front of the Charing Cross police station frozen in terror while the 2 men inspiring that fear stood within eyesight, making threatening comments, laughing, and engaging with other members of the homeless community who were waiting for another charity's food drop, showing them the display on the smartphone and pointing at me. When the charity owners arrived, we entered the station and the woman on the desk agreed to have an officer speak with us. After a small wait, one of the owners and I were invited into an office to explain the situation. He did most of the talking, for which I was tearfully grateful. At first, he introduced himself and his charity, understandably highlighting the work they did and the genuine trust they had earned from the local homeless community, including myself. He was correct on all accounts. I was, and remain, in complete agreement, and didn't hesitate to make that fact known. He made reference to a sleep-out event they were organizing to raise funds and awareness, and though I was quietly starting to wish we could move on and address the matter at hand, didn't begrudge him the opportunity to use the situation to promote their upcoming endeavors. The conversation turned to the issues that had brought us there, the assault of the woman I had reported, and the subsequent threats and attacks that included other cases of harassment I didn't report to the police, as the immediate threat to my life was not present on those occasions. All too quickly, I found myself relegated to the condescending stereotype I had experienced with previous charities, the naughty child who doesn't understand the complexities of the adult world and needs the charities to survive and do all their thinking and talking for them. I had reported the assaults, both on the woman and myself, seemingly without understanding how complex these matters are and the difficulties it presented to the police. The charity owner, of course, did. He was obsequiously sympathetic to the police and the good work they do. He had tried to offer advice and guidance, but I still didn't understand how complicated these matters are. Personally, I don't see much complexity in trying to prevent sexual and physical assaults, particularly when the threat of physical assault against myself is imminent, but what do I know? I'm only homeless. He also understood while incidents like these are unfortunate, he knew there was little the police could do. I took that opportunity to disagree. My former friend's previous convictions include assaults against the police. Over the past year he had been tried, convicted, and served a 3-month prison term for one such assault. I had supported him throughout and was familiar with the evidence that had been used in the prosecution. I began listing the possibilities I thought may be useful to my immediate predicament. I asked about the closed-circuit television cameras in the coffee shop and surrounding vicinity, as they had provided crucial evidence in my former friend's previous police assault. The officer informed me CCTV cameras aren't useful because they don't have sound. The charity owner nodded his agreement. I asked about witnesses, the staff and customers of the coffee shop where these events had transpired. I was subsequently told personal witness testimony is ineffective and unreliable. The charity owner continued to nod fawningly. I asked about the possibility of a restraining order. The charity owner spoke up at that point, informing me they were expensive and not worth the money because they don't really work, his new friend the police officer nodding his agreement in turn. I asked if the police could at least speak to the gentlemen themselves and tell them to back off. They were standing outside the station while we were having this meeting. Again, no. The police are not there to act as my own personal security force. Nods all round. I pointed out the discrepancy between these being valid tools used in cases of assault against the police themselves, yet seemingly invalid when assaults are made against the homeless. I was again informed it was more complicated than I realized, and he could try to explain, but I wouldn't understand. I was told to stop coming into London, except of course to volunteer with the charity, apparently my only valid reason for being there. I mentioned I feared the two men would track me down to where I had been housed and attack me there. I was told I was being silly and overreacting. That would not happen. Word after word after word. Brick after brick after brick. Nod after nod after nod. I recognized the familiar wall I was banging my head against and realized I would not make any progress in my attempts to prevent being physically attacked. My heart sank as the conversation turned back to the sleep-out event being organized and the importance of building bridges between the police and the homeless through these charity events. The officer agreed to provide details of the person to contact to discuss how the police could assist with the event. It proved a wonderful networking opportunity for both, just not for the homeless community they were building bridges to help, particularly those who had been sexually assaulted or were in current danger of physical violence. We are just unfortunate. As the meeting drew to a close, I grudgingly agreed to not request action be brought against the men who were threatening my life, stressing I was unhappy with the outcome but felt I had no other choice. He assured me he would add my concerns to his report. He didn't. We left the police station, passing the charity food drop currently in operation beside it, being assisted by the two upstanding Reformed Christians who were still a threat to my life. I was disgusted, livid, and still frightened. I returned to my flat and turned my phone off, too angry to discuss the events with anyone until I had the opportunity to think them through. I did not want to be disturbed by anyone. 4 days later I discovered I was on the missing person list. The charity owners had been unable to contact me, so contacted a family member asking him to report my worrying absence. I immediately phoned the detective from the missing persons unit assigned to my case and the matter was easily resolved. I had actually done what I had been instructed and stayed home. I had simply turned off my phone, an understandable reaction in her opinion. The police investigating my disappearance had not even bothered to knock on my front door. We discussed the circumstances surrounding my disappearance, and she expressed surprise at my frustration because on the previous incident reports it stated I was satisfied with the outcomes. I clarified I had not been satisfied in the slightest and had made that perfectly clear at the time. I had wanted my dissatisfaction and the belief I had felt bullied into agreement clearly specified on the reports. She believed me and promised to have my concerns addressed. She advised me to keep pressing for charges to be laid, and to try to contact higher-ranking police officers than the ones I had been dealing with. She promised to do what she could as well. She kept those promises. On January 27, 2020, I received an email from the officer I had met at the Charing Cross police station, asking me if I would still like to give a statement and progress the incident to the stage of having the suspect arrested. I responded in the affirmative and also requested the procedures required to file a formal complaint. Not receiving a response, I sent a follow-up email on January 30th asking for an appointment. I sent a third email on January 31st asking for a response. On February 1st, he apologized for the delays, stating he had been out of the office all week, and arranged an interview at the Charing Cross police station at 9 a.m. on February 6th. I arrived. It was the same desk officer I had encountered before, and she greeted me with,
"You again. What do you want?"
I informed her I had an appointment with the officer I had spoken to previously. She said she would call upstairs and let him know. An hour and a half later, he had not arrived. I twice asked her to remind him I was waiting, and she promised to do so. After another 15 minutes, I concluded he would not be coming down to speak with me. I told the officer on the desk I was leaving, and she said she would inform him of my decision. I made my way to the coffee shop where I could access their free Wi-Fi connection and check my emails for the first time that day. There was a communication dated the night before informing me he was needed elsewhere on public order duties and canceling the appointment. He offered to take my statement over the phone or to reschedule our meeting for February 7th between 10 and 12. I wanted to handle the matter in person and agreed to return for the time he requested. I returned before 9:45 the next morning, and the same desk officer promised to inform him of my arrival. I waited over 3 hours and he again did not appear. As before, I asked for him to be reminded of my presence and received the same assurance she would let him know. Realizing the futility of another wasted journey, I again told the desk officer I could not wait any longer and left. I returned to the same coffee shop and on accessing the internet found an email sent at 11:20. He stated he understood I was at the Charing Cross station, but he was based at the West End Central Station, a claim that stood in stark contrast to the station listed on all his online communications. He had offered to come to Charing Cross for 12:30. The time was now well past 2 o'clock. He also claimed he did not start his shift until 11 o'clock, despite asking for a meeting at 10 o'clock. I grew fed up with the costly and time-wasting runaround I was getting and gave up all hope of assistance from the Metropolitan Police. I immediately had more pressing concerns. For despite the condescending admonitions from the police officer and the charity owner my concerns were silly, they proved valid. My former friend had followed me to Croydon, was staying in the Wellington Hostel on Lansdowne Road, was arranging to have a charity house him in the area, and spreading the same slanderous accusations about my pedophilia convictions to the local homeless community and business owners. Our paths unexpectedly crossed the morning after my second aborted attempt to meet with the officer at Charing Cross Station. He shouted, "Ha!" and proceeded to chase me down the street, again screaming,
I'm going to tear you apart and show the world how evil you are inside. You've played your last Joker card.
I ran for my life, jumping on the first available bus to escape. He continued the chase, and for a few terrifying moments I feared he would catch up at one of the subsequent stops. Those fears ultimately proved groundless, and I spent the remainder of the day riding buses throughout London before returning to my flat late that night, terrified he had managed to find that location and be waiting for me. I spent the next few days in a permanent state of dread he would appear at my charity-approved home. I was also concerned about the easy access to my room. The glass door leading from my room into the backyard has no lock. Anyone can enter. Despite numerous requests to the landlord to have one installed, it still remained an easy point of access 15 months after I had been forced into tenancy. I was also terrified he would be placed in my accommodation through the charities assisting him, for a room had been available for a number of weeks. Every phone call and every knock at the door made me jump with fright. I was just as fearful of leaving, limiting my actions to odd times of the day and night, and taking long circuitous routes to avoid being followed. The enemy you can't see is far more unnerving than the enemy you can. At least when you see him, you know which direction to run. When he is hovering, lurking, skulking, unseen in the periphery, every step you take could lead to a surprise, possibly fatal encounter. I saw him numerous times over the following month, but managed to slip away unseen. My attempts at stealth ultimately proved futile, as I knew they would. On March 5, 2020, I was standing at the bus stop on Wellesley Road at 4:15 a.m. to catch a bus into London. The street was deserted, but I was still caught by surprise when I suddenly heard someone shout, "You're that fucking pedo," behind me. It was one of the local homeless community. He shouted, "Fucking pervert," and moved to headbutt me. I countered with a headbutt of my own and scored a direct hit, my forehead smashing into his mouth, splashing blood on both our faces. I rammed his groin with my knee, and as he started to crumple, kicked his feet out from under him and shoved him to the ground. I kicked him in the stomach 3 times. As he grabbed for his mobile phone, gasping "Police" and "Pedo," I kicked it out of his hand, watched it smash into the brick wall a few feet away and land on the ground. I jumped to where it lay and proceeded to stomp on it repeatedly, shattering it to ensure it remained unquestionably inoperable. I redirected my attention back to my accuser. He lay on his side, holding his stomach and repeating, "Fucking pedo," as best he could through the blood streaming out of his mouth. My fury immediately changed to mortification at what I had just done. I had used physical force to defend myself on 3 separate occasions since becoming homeless, but never with such violence. On every previous occasion I had surprise on my side, and an unexpected headbutt or quick punch in the mouth was enough to buy me enough time to run. I wasn't sure the exact criteria for justifiable force was in relation to self-defense, but I was fairly certain I had surpassed them. I was also relieved I had switched jackets that morning and had failed to transfer the scissors I had been keeping in its pocket in lieu of the broken bottleneck I had been taught to have readily available just in case. I had pointedly been carrying them for over a month as my efforts to obtain police assistance proved increasingly futile. I had chastised myself for the oversight when I initially discovered their absence barely 20 minutes prior to this incident. All I felt now was chilling relief. Go for the throat indeed. I said, "Shit. Are you okay?" He kept repeating "fucking pedo" as he slowly started to pick himself up. I watched him stagger to his feet for a few moments, then turned and ran. I returned to my flat, stuffed a few belongings in my rucksack, and kept running. With no idea what to do, where to go, or who to turn to, I left London, and the worsening nightmare my dream had become.